widely regarded as the most influential vice president in Sierra Leone's history. Sorie Ibrahim Koroma, popularly known as SI Koroma, was for a long time the number 2 man in the country, serving as vice president from 1971 to 1985. During his heydays, he had great power and influence, and his name was a household name throughout Sierra Leone. A master planner and political strategist extraordinaire, he acquired a reputation for thuggery, violence, and political foul play. For this reason, he is widely regarded as the architect of political violence, political thuggery, and political foul play in the country. S.I. Koroma was explicit about his belief that African politics and violence are inseparable. He argued that if he did not win elections by the vote, he would do so by unopposed. For this relentless defense, he earned himself many enemies. In this episode, we cover the life story of Sorie Ibrahim Koroma, popularly known as S.I. Koroma, who was denied the presidency of his country, despite serving his master so well. And even though he was the undisputed anointed successor to the president, both because of the provision of the constitution on the matter, and because of his standing in his political party, and commitment to its course and loyalty to the president. Sorie Ibrahim Koroma, popularly known as S.I. Koroma, was born in 1930 in Port Loko town, Maforki Chiefdom, in the Port Loko district in the northern region of what was then known as British Sierra Leone. S.I. Koroma was the only child of his mother. His father was a member of the Mandingo ethnic group of Guinean descent, and he died when S.I. Koroma was just a little boy. After the death of his father, his mother got married to an ethnic Themne man named Bokari Dumbuya, who was a nephew of then Paramount Chief of Maforki Chiefdom in Port Loko District, Paramount Chief Alikali Mela. S.I. Koroma was raised in the Dumbuya family household instead of the Koroma family compound. Though raised in a Tamne home, S.I. Koroma never forgot his Mandingo heritage, and he was also fluent in the Mandingo language. Paramount Chief Alikali Mela made his nephew Bokari Dumbuya a sub-chief. Alikali Mela also crowned S.I.'s mother a chief. That was how S.I. Koroma, the only child to his mother, became a member of 2 important ruling families in Port Loko. S.I. Koroma was educated at the Government Model Primary School in the nation's capital, Freetown, and the Bo Government Secondary School in Bo Town, in the southern region of the country. At Bo School, he was a prefect. He went to Bo School at a time when it was an institution exclusively for individuals belonging to ruling families in the provinces. The school was founded in 1906 at the behest of then British colonial governor Sir Leslie Probyn, to educate the sons of paramount chiefs or nominees of paramount chiefs. It was his connection to the ruling families of Port Loko that made it possible for S.I. Koroma to attend Bo School. While in school, S.I. Koroma was considered as nothing more than a mediocre student. However, what he lacked in intellect, S.I. Koroma made up for in ambition. S.I. Koroma was a dark-skinned African who favored white suits. He was a soft-spoken man. Nevertheless, he was a highly intelligent strategist and a skillful manipulator. He was a powerful, persuasive, and eloquent speaker. S.I. Koroma had the ability to persuade people to accept as plausible his own point of view. Soon after he left school, S.I. Koroma, who had a fierce determination to succeed in life, landed a job with the Sierra Leone Government Cooperative Department. He worked there from 1951 to 1958 and took a course during that period at the Cooperative College in Nigeria. In 1958, he resigned from government service to set up his own private business. He fared well in the transportation business and within a short time became Secretary General of the Sierra Leone Motor Transport Union. In the late 1950s, S.I. Koroma became a member of the Temne Progressive Union, TPU, a group that was formed for members belonging to the Temne ethnic group that are predominantly found in the northern region of the country. However, realizing that many people from the north who spoke Temne actually belonged to other northern tribes, the name Temne Progressive Union was later changed to Northern Progressive Union, NPU. The NPU was in existence when a prominent trade unionist named Siaka Stevens returned from the Independence Conference in London, where leaders of all registered functional political parties in the country had gathered in order to negotiate with the British government for the independence of Sierra Leone. Siaka Stevens was the only delegate who refused to append his signature to the final independence document because he was unable to agree on various matters, including defense and the holding of general elections before independence. He demanded that the electorate be given a chance to make its views known before independence. On his return to Sierra Leone, he started a movement that he named the Election Before Independence Movement, the EBIM, which was embraced by members of the Northern Progressive Union. With his large Creole following, Siaka Stevens transformed what was a purely Northern interest group to a national political party. In 1960, a political party, the All People's Congress, the APC, was born with Siaka Stevens as its leader. As a result, S.I. Koroma became one of the founding members of the All People's Congress, the APC political party. At the inception of the APC, S.I. Koroma became the party's first national propaganda and organizing secretary. As the party's political strategist, he demonstrated untiring effort and energy in educating the people about their political rights, and he succeeded in bringing the party to the people. Founded as a mass party, as opposed to the then-ruling Sierra Leone People's Party, the SLPP, which was more of an elitist party, the APC won the support of the ordinary people because of its grassroots politics. The party drew support from drivers, market women, the rural and urban unemployed. It also attracted the support of clerks, teachers, and university professors. The modestly educated also found the party attractive because of its leadership that had little beyond a high school education, was largely lower middle class, and was generally inclined toward a vague, though attractive socialism. The party established its base in Freetown and the northern region of the country. The APC quickly outflanked all other opposition parties in the country. Sierra Leone gained its independence from Britain on April 27, 1961. However, close to the independence celebrations, S.I. Koroma, together with other top members of the APC, including Siaka Stevens, were arrested and detained for allegedly plotting to disrupt the independence celebrations, as the APC party was urging that independence should be postponed until free elections have been held. As a result, the leaders of the APC party were arrested and detained prior to the independence celebrations. However, S.I. Koroma, together with other APC members, were released soon after the independence celebrations. In May 1962, Sierra Leone held its first general elections as an independent nation. In that election, S.I. Koroma was elected to Parliament as Member of Parliament for Freetown Central 1 constituency. He was returned to Parliament for the same constituency in the country's second post-independent general elections, which were held in March 1967, and his political party, the APC, narrowly won the election, and the leader of the APC, Siaka Stevens, was sworn in as Prime Minister, but was deposed in a military coup after only few hours of his swearing in as Prime Minister on March 24, 1967. After a year of military rule, the APC was restored to power with its leader Siaka Stevens as Prime Minister of the country in April 1968. Following the return to civilian rule in 1968, S.I. Koroma was appointed Minister of Trade and Industry in Siaka Stevens' first cabinet. In a cabinet reshuffle in 1969, he was appointed Minister of Agriculture and National Resources. S.I. Koroma proved to be most loyal to Siaka Stevens at a time when his position as Prime Minister was seriously threatened by the political euphoria brought about by a new political party that was formed in 1970 by a group of opposition personalities and some members of the APC party who resigned from the government in protest against rampant corruption. They formed a new political party, the National Democratic Party (NDP), that later became known as the United Democratic Party (UDP). It is believed that it was S.I. Koroma who advised Prime Minister Siaka Stevens to declare a state of emergency, ban the UDP and arrest its leaders for allegedly inciting riotous conduct and for creating a state of political tension in the country. That was how the UDP was stamped out. Henceforth, S.I. Koroma became Siaka Stevens' most trusted political lieutenant. In April 1971, the country adopted a new constitution, transforming Sierra Leone into a presidential republic with Siaka Stevens as the first executive president. On the attainment of republican status in 1971, S.I. Koroma was catapulted to the enviable position of vice president and prime minister, mainly due to his continued loyalty to Siaka Stevens and the APC party. As vice president, he was the principal assistant of the president in the discharge of his executive functions, and as prime minister, he was responsible for supervision of all ministries and the prerogative of mercy. As vice president and prime minister, he blazed the trail for the implementation of a self-help project, which was an important aspect of rural development in the task of nation building during the 1970s. These self-help projects were community development efforts in which local people provided labor and sometimes finance for tasks formerly undertaken by government. He succeeded in mobilizing and galvanizing the energies of the youth for rural development in the 70s. He as well succeeded in implementing and popularizing the self-help project. The astounding success of his Mafoki Chiefdom self-help project brought about the introduction of many more such projects in the country. During construction projects, S.I. Koroma joined the labor force himself to help set an example to people taking part in the self-help project. In another cabinet reshuffle in 1975, he was retained as vice president and made Minister of Finance. As a result of his continued loyalty to Siaka Stevens and the APC as a political party in general, he remained Siaka Stevens' most trusted political lieutenant. S.I. Koroma was not a backseat party member or politician. He was always at the forefront working assiduously for Siaka Stevens individually and the APC as a political party in general. In 1977, he was attending a meeting in Germany when he got involved in a gruesome accident that all but left him for dead. He survived but became physically impaired, yet on his return home after treatment prior to the 1977 Sierra Leonean parliamentary elections, he continued to work assiduously for Siaka Stevens and the APC by involving heavily in the election campaign. It got to the point, rumor had it, that President Siaka Stevens commented on his eagerness that "do not pretend to be well when we all know you are quite ill, just because you want to be at the forefront of politics." In 1978, Siaka Stevens declared Sierra Leone a one-party state with the APC to be the sole legally recognized party. All other political parties were banned, including the main opposition, the SLPP. The one-party constitution made provision for 2 vice presidents and does away with the office of prime minister. Following the declaration of a one-party state in 1978, S.I. Koroma became first vice president. Christian Alusine Kamara Taylor, popularly known as C.A. Kamara Taylor, another founding member of the APC, who had served successively as Minister of Lands, Mines and Labor from 1968 to 1971, Finance Minister from 1971 to 1975, and Prime Minister and Minister of Interior from 1975 to 1978, was appointed second vice president. The one-party constitution also provided in clear terms the process of succession from one president to another. It stipulated that on the death, resignation of the head of state, or when he could no longer discharge his duties, he would be succeeded by the first vice president, who would be in office for 90 days, after which period an election could then be held for a leader. In the case of the death or impediment of the first vice president, the succession passed to the second vice president. This stipulation from the constitution simply left S.I. Koroma as Siaka Stevens' undisputed successor. Throughout Siaka Stevens' reign, S.I. Koroma was a strong man of the APC. Many people believe that the party's survival and longevity hinged largely on him up to his retirement. He acquired a reputation for thuggery as he led the dreaded APC youth wing. He was seen to be in charge of the mobilization of the youth to carry out acts of thuggery against any perceived opposition, dissent, or protest. He was reputed as being willing to comply with any instructions Siaka Stevens gave, and to do what it took to win elections. He was not known to have compunction in such matters. He was easily the most dreaded of the APC functionaries. S.I. Koroma was generally regarded as the anointed successor to Siaka Stevens, both because of the provision of the constitution on the matter and because of his standing in the party and commitment to its course and loyalty to Siaka Stevens. He was credited for having invented the 99 tactics for winning elections, and these included thuggery and the display of excessive violence and intimidation committed against political opponents, especially at elections. He said violence was inseparable from African politics, and he argued that if he did not win elections by the vote, he would do so by unopposed. For this role that he played in the APC's violent campaigns against opposing forces, he became popularly known as Agba Satani, meaning the worst of the devils, or one could say Satan's chief disciple. For this relentless defense, he earned himself many enemies. Notwithstanding this side of him, he was quite a popular figure among the rank and file of the APC, but also to some extent because of this tendency of his to resort to violence by whatever means to gain an advantage. He was also feared, not only by opposing factions but even by members of his own party. This was the persona of the man who was next to Siaka Stevens and who was expected to take over the mantle. As the 1980s wore on, the increasingly regular social unrest undermined both the political power and the personal confidence of Siaka Stevens, who was by then well into the 8th decade of his life. The Sierra Leonean president found himself increasingly isolated by the momentum of history as friends, allies, and other colleagues among the first generation of post-colonial African leaders receded from the scene. Hence, Siaka Stevens began to prepare his own departure from 1982. Under the constitutional provisions enacted in 1978 on the death, resignation, or incapacity of the president, the first vice president would succeed him as acting head of state for a period of 90 days, after which period an election could then be held for a leader. In the case of the death or impediment of the first vice president, the succession passed to the second vice president. While S.I. Koroma's loyalty to Siaka Stevens was unimpeachable, the extent of the president's confidence in his deputy was nonetheless more reserved. There were indications that Siaka Stevens favored the next candidate in the presidential succession, C.A. Kamara Taylor. In addition to their political ties, the ties between Siaka Stevens and C.A. Kamara Taylor had been reinforced by their arrests for sedition during the tense days of 1961, when the latter had pleaded guilty in order to exonerate the former. Fate, however, was unkind to C.A. Kamara Taylor, who in mid-1984 was stricken by a neurological disorder from which he never fully recovered before his death the following March. C.A. Kamara Taylor was succeeded by the Attorney General and Minister of Justice Francis Mina as second vice president. Francis Mina, a Southerner, was a newcomer to the APC from the outlawed SLPP. Francis Mina was related to Siaka Stevens maternally. In his successor, Siaka Stevens sought not only a candidate who would preserve the stability of the political order he had imposed upon Sierra Leone, but perhaps even more importantly would also be the least likely to dig into the past for any misconduct during the present administration. S.I. Koroma, seen by many as a Machiavellian politician, will not hesitate to sacrifice Siaka Stevens on the political altar to win the love and support of the people. But most importantly, Siaka Stevens was convinced that S.I. Koroma's succession would have further polarized the country's politics into Southeast, Mende, and Northwest, Temne. Eventually, the president's choice fell on the Armed Forces commander, Major General Joseph Saidu Momo, whose support had been critical throughout Siaka Stevens' rule. The whole country went into pocket debates in corners that Siaka Stevens was protecting his life by making sure that the army chief will not prosecute him by bringing him to justice to account for all he did during his misrule of power and human right abuse. Although he had been an appointed member of parliament since 1974, as a soldier, Momo was prohibited from engaging in national politics as such. Moreover, the constitution clearly provided for presidential succession and the holding of elections within a definite period. Nonetheless, undeterred as he had always been by legal technicalities, Siaka Stevens offered Momo the presidency during a meeting in December 1984. In order to legally manipulate the constitution, Siaka Stevens used his second vice president, Francis Mina, who was a trained lawyer. Francis Mina orchestrated the constitutional amendments necessary for President Siaka Stevens to pass over his first vice president S.I. Koroma and make Major General Joseph Saidu Momo his successor. On July 24, 1985, a motion was tabled in Parliament amending the Constitution to pass the presidential succession to a presidential council consisting of the two vice presidents, the Attorney General, the Speaker of Parliament, and the leader of the APC, instead of to the first vice president directly. The legislation, with some amendments, passed with only 2 abstentions and a single vote against, cast by Finance Minister Abdoulaye Conte, who was subsequently dismissed from the cabinet. In August 1985, delegates of the APC met at the Bintumani Conference Hall in Freetown and elected Joseph Saidu Momo, who had resigned his military commission, the leader and secretary general of the ruling party. In a final humiliation of his long loyal deputy, Siaka Stevens forced First Vice President S.I. Koroma to formally nominate the man who walked into the inheritance that he had long assumed would be his. The nomination was seconded by the second Vice President Francis Mina. The following year, S.I. Koroma retired from politics and returned to his farm in Port Loko to devote his time and attention to the management of his palm oil plantation. He lived a private life until his death at his Wilberforce residence in Freetown on April 30, 1994, after a lengthy illness. He was 64 years old.